Today's passage will absolutely inspire you and give you strength and courage in your time of need. Joshua 1 and verse 9. Here's what the scripture says. Have I not commanded thee? Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be dismayed. For the Lord thy God is with thee, whithersoever thou goest. There are three things I want to represent from this text in the context of it. Number one, this verse here, verse 9 of Joshua 1, begins with a command, and God reminds us of that command. He says, quote, have I not already commanded you? Have I not already said this to you? And of course, in the case of Joshua and his ultimate leadership that he was embarking on here in this chapter, yes, God had already encouraged him to be strong and courageous. As a matter of fact, in this first chapter, you just look straight up the page here into verse 6. We start in verse 9 and we back up to verse 6. Here's that command that God gave. Here God wrote and said, be strong and of good courage, for unto this people shalt thou divide an inheritance in the land, which I swear unto your fathers to give them. Now, the reason that's such a key is because if you read the first really 5 verses that preceded this in the chapter, you find out that Joshua opens with a very disparaging idea, and that is Moses, the long leader of the people of God, has already died. Joshua has been then in turn given the leadership role over these people, and Joshua, just like probably I would have been in that state, I assume, is somewhat dismayed, is somewhat discouraged in the fact that he knows he's embarking on what seems to be a nearly impossible task. Moses' leadership had obviously been great, but he was dealing with a people who were struggling within themselves, and oftentimes Moses was persecuted and doubted for his leadership ability simply because Moses was trying to do the will of God. Now, Moses has passed on. Why is that? Because God had seemingly already foreordained for Joshua to do this. And so verse 6, coming in ahead of verse 9, what God says to Joshua is, I'm going to let you lead these people. You're going to ultimately get these people in the land. You're going to help these people to divide the land that I have promised. You see in the very next verse, verse 7 of Joshua 1, only be thou strong. Watch this now. And very courageous, that thou mayest observe to do according to all the law which Moses thy servant commanded thee. Turn nor from it, from the right or the left, that thou mayest prosper whithersoever thou goest. So we do have a command in this verse. Number 2, it's the most obvious word in all 3 verses, verse 6, 7, and 9, and that is the word courage. What does courage mean? Courage is the ability to stand that is given unto us when the power to stand ourselves is just not there. I'm mindful of what the psalmist recorded, Psalm chapter 103 and verse 14, where there the psalmist reveals that God, quote, knows our frame. That is, he knows that we are but made from dust. And of course, in creation, that's exactly how God made mankind. He brought Adam forth from, quote, the dust of the ground. Now, what's a characteristic of dust? Well, the idea there is that dust is just what it sounds like. It's just something that just kind of disintegrates. And oftentimes, I can remember as a child, I'd get out and play in the mud, as we called it. I'd take dust, and we had a very dusty area, red mud down here in Alabama, and I would take that dust and mix a little bit of water with it, probably from the dog's bowl, but mix some water in it, and I would form clay out of that. I could build and I could make anything. But you let that sun come down and bear down upon even that thing that I've created out of the dust, ultimately, what would happen? Well, it would fall back within itself. You see, God knows our frame. He knows from which we were actually created. He knows that our frame, albeit we're of His greatest crowning creation, we are weak at times. And sometimes we crumble under pressure. And so what God says here concerning courage is, I'm going to give you the power to stand. I'm going to give you something that you don't have within yourself, and that is the ability for your frame that I have made, even though it be dust, to uphold you. And so they're being reminded of that. And then in the third place, we see a real key in this, not just God's command and the courage that is there, but we see in the last part of this as well, the idea of the consideration. To reread verse 9 again, have I not commanded thee, be strong and of good courage, be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. Now here's the key here, for the Lord thy God is with thee, whithersoever thou goest. What confidence that instills, what courage is available through knowing that the Lord our God is with us, in some senses are ever present with us and willing to go whithersoever. That's old King James speak to mean just wherever you desire to go, God will go. Now don't misunderstand that. That's not the implication there, that whatever and whenever we decide to go, that we just go and God will just kind of mope along behind us and he'll be there to empower us and encourage us in every facet of life. That's not actually true. In the context, and we've already read it, if you go back up to verse 7, the specific instruction was there that God, yes, will be with you wheresoever you go, under the mind or under the guise that first of all, that we, Joshua in this case, would do, quote, do according to all the law which Moses thy servant had commanded thee. He even said, don't turn to the right, don't turn to the left, you go straight down the middle, you do the law. And when you do the law, ultimately it comes down from God. God says, when you do my will and you follow my will, I'll be with you there. You know, oftentimes the reason we fail and falter in life is because not that God is not trying to be present with us, but we take the presence of God, which is there, you can imagine, in this circle, in this area, and we ourselves move away from that to the right or to the left. And in doing that, we leave the presence of God, you know? And so what is being stated here under these three things we're developing here, yes, it is true, there is a command. We must do this. Be strong and courageous. Be very courageous. Again, the verse ahead of it said. But not only that, there is certainly courage that is found here. God can uplift us, can uphold us, and can strengthen our frame to the point that we can stand under his power, not under ours. But the consideration and the end of this is under, again, the heading and the guise that we first do his will. Thank you so much for joining me today on the passage. Until next time, stay faithful, my friend.